So good morning, everybody. So it's wonderful to have a chance to spend some time and explore these really, really important and incredibly interesting teachings with Annie La. This afternoon we'll have a lot more time to explore in some depth the logic and the process of working with mind through meditation that accords with this whole logic of working with mind through the process of aging, sickness, dying, through the death process and into our next life. So we'll have a chance to go quite specifically through these processes. But this morning, Pema asked that we explore something that she brought up last night, which is to explore the way in which our everyday life is filled with space, filled with gaps, is the nature of coming and going, and this is everything is sort of comes, it goes, there's space in between. That is what we mean by bardo. And to explore the fact that this concept of moving from one thing, one experience, one circumstance to the next is a constant process. So in those processes, there are constant spaces and gaps and openness. And this is what we train in, whether we're training just for this life as meditators or as people who want to find some kind of flexibility and balance in their mind. This is what we train in. This is what we explore. And then as we move towards the end of our life and move into our next life, the familiarity with that space, the ability to recognize the fundamental spaciousness, the fundamental openness, the basic workability, the lack of fixedness in our experience sets us up so that we can exit this life, move into the next with a quality of balance and ease. And more than that, some quality of intention. So just for a couple of minutes, I want to just talk about how it is with this mind of ours. So this extraordinary instrument that we call mind, this mind of ours creates our world and determines our response to the world that we've created. In some ways, you could say the world that we experience is the mind that experiences it. So if we have an agitated mind, we perceive an agitated world. If we have a fearful mind, we perceive a threatening world. If we have a dull mind, we perceive a kind of gray and flat world. If we have a mind that is open and spacious, we perceive a world that is open and inviting, a friendly world. This is mind. So many people think that meditation is a way to take a break, to settle a little bit, a kind of stress release. That's great. Why not? We all need a break. But actually, that loses the understanding of the breadth and the depth of the practice of meditation and what it offers for us, this sort of simple profundity of what a settled mind allows us. Meditation, in the Tibetan, the word gom is the word for meditation. Gom means to become familiar with. Pema used that term last night. To become familiar with. So what are we becoming familiar with here? In meditation, we're becoming familiar with mind itself, and then mind's expression. In other words, the world that mind perceives. Mind and mind's world, we say. So in meditation, what we're going to do is we're going to, through various techniques, the technique is sort of less important than understanding why we're doing what we're doing. In meditation, we're going to allow mind to settle a little bit. And in that settling, we have the opportunity to investigate what is there, how this works. And on the basis of this workability and this curiosity, then we can begin to explore and make use of the basic qualities of mind. And so we'll talk much more about that this afternoon. So here, again, we're talking about bardo, in between spaces. And so we're invited to explore the various bardos, or the in-between places, or the spaces in our everyday life. The kind of natural openness, the gaps in our experience. When we can experience this openness and gaps in our life, when we become familiar with that, then when we die, we're in familiar territory. We've been here before. We know what's going on. We're comfortable with this quality of openness and the uncertainty that right now, this sort of spaciousness, that gapaciousness, brings to us. The reason we're uncomfortable with that is because we're not familiar with it yet. And so in the practice of meditation, we become familiar with that so that when it dawns on us, when it's sort of thrust upon us, in our daily life, or at the moment of death, we know that space. We can navigate that space. We can surf that space. And then on the basis of that skill, then this experience becomes familiar. We don't panic. We don't need to freak out. And we can move through that in a way that that engenders a quality of sort of knowingness, presence, and again, I mentioned a little bit some quality of intentionality. So that from that point of view, death is not an insult or an unwanted guest. Death is a familiar friend. And more than anything else, and I think Pema alluded to it last night, and she will talk much more about it this morning, I think, that death and the process of dying becomes an extraordinary opportunity. For it to be an opportunity at that point, we need to learn how to take advantage of the opportunity at this point. So, how do we understand this then? Then we look at our experiences in our life. Our experiences in our life, our very life itself, our very understanding of ourselves. If we look closely, we see that everything we experience, as Pema mentioned last night, is a process. It's a process of something coming into being, something seeming to be present for some time, maybe just a moment or a longer period of time, and coming out of being. Arising, dissolving, arising, dissolving. This is the way all experience is. But what we do is we take that arising, and rather than having a sort of balanced and open sort of perspective, we take these arisings and we take them as real things. And we take them as real things, and just sort of reflexively, we assume that they're real things and that they last for a long time. And rather than just be the arising and dissipation of the weather, for instance, we hold on to that, and it becomes us, me, my life. Oy vey. So in many ways, you could say that the difference between a life of kind of around everything, or the life of that's more balanced and open, is just the ability to perceive our experience in that way. Coming, going, coming, going, coming, going. Everything is like that. Thank goodness. In some ways, you could say our life and ourselves, this proverbial me, is more like a verb than a noun. It's an event. It's not a thing. That's what I tell my wife. It doesn't always work. We're going to do a guided meditation in a moment on this, but we have images for this that are classic images, but also classic experiences. A perfect example would be, a perfect example of this, the nature of this sort of arising and dissipating, arising and dissipating. Things arise when the causes and conditions are present. They arise, that thing takes shape, appears, and then as soon as the causes and conditions shift, then that thing goes out of being. It's not dying, it's just moving. It's just shifting, it's changing. It's changing its display. Sometimes we use that word. So a perfect example would be an example of a rainbow. Rainbow is a great one. Really classic. There's like 10 classic examples. But rainbow is really a beautiful one. So if we take our 4-year-old out and look, sweetheart, there's a rainbow in the sky, and they go, wow. And then the rainbow goes away, and the little one starts to cry. What do we say? We say, oh, sweetheart, that's what rainbows do. That's why we love them so much, because they're so cool. They come and they go. We don't know when they're going to come. They're so beautiful hanging in the sky, and then they're gone. Isn't that cool? And the little one goes, oh, yeah. Right? And then the little one doesn't have a problem with that anymore, right? We don't get the message. As usual, we're the messenger, but we don't get the message. So what's the message? So a rainbow, from what I understand, is the coming together of water particles in the sky with a certain amount of sunlight, and then the observer, being oneself, in a certain, whatever, relationship to that, right? The sun, the water droplets, or whatever in the world they are up there, and then the perspective. And when they all come together, whew, we have this extraordinary display. It's a fabulous display. But as soon as any of those shift, then it goes away. And we go on our way, having felt totally, delighted by what we saw. Actually, everything is a rainbow. Everything is the coming together of certain causes and conditions. In fact, when we begin to realize how much our sort of diet, the sleep we had the night before, and our hormones define our mood and our perception of the world, actually we're totally insulted. But even our moods are rainbows, right? They're coming together of various things, and we lose the message. We lose, oh, something has happened. Something is going on now, and the result is this experience that, let's say a mood. We don't know how to ride that. We don't know how to see that. We don't know how to understand that it's just an event that comes, it arises, and then if we know how to hold it lightly, like the rainbow, if we know how to hold it lightly, then it moves on. Does that make sense? So then there is a quality of in-between. There is something before whatever that thing was, and then it comes for a moment. Actually, emotions, I think scientifically we know, come for a very, very short time. Insultingly short time. In fact, they come, we somehow fall in love with them. Usually not a good relationship. And we hold on to them long past when they actually had any sort of life to them, right? We don't know how to let them go. So a mood is a rainbow. Everything is a rainbow. This life is a rainbow. Does that make sense? This is not poetry. This is the way it is. When the various things that come together, it's hard to imagine, but the various things come together that create this thing that I call me, then something happens. But that doesn't last. It goes away. And we lose the message that we give that little 4-year-old. Sweetheart, this is the way it is. It comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. And if we can get on that side of it, there's freedom. There's ease. There's a quality of delight. A quality of inquiry, interest, curiosity. Wow, what was that came and went yesterday? Do you know what I mean? What happened yesterday? But what we so often do is we slap a name on it, and usually sticky names. Really sticky names. The stickiest name is me. We're a whole world of rainbows colliding and arguing, trying to scratch out our territory, and all the while coming, going, coming, going, coming, going. That was the synopsis of about 5 years of Buddhist philosophical study. So all of these, Pema used the word vignette last night. All of these are little vignettes, little chapters, little moments. Understanding these as events, whether we understand them as events that come and go and come and go and come and go, or we understand them as real things that happen and that are me or are my world. Between that lies whether we experience, again, a quality of ease and peace or a quality of entrapment. The only difference is how we understand what happens. It has nothing to do with what is going on at all. So the path of meditation, often mixed with some study, is to begin to understand that that's how things are. So let's do a guided meditation for a little bit. Just out of interest, who here of you is fairly new to meditation? Okay, great. So in this guided meditation, you could do this with your eyes closed, your eyes open. So let's start with an experience that maybe you've had, a recent experience with a friend or a mate or a family member. Something that was some discord, some difficult event or circumstance. Bring that to mind. See if you can recall that, believe it or not, there was a time prior to that circumstance. Perhaps if it was a difficult circumstance, there was a time where there wasn't difficulty. And then, due to some causes and conditions, something happened between you. Something changed. Something was said. Something was imagined. Things were fine. Something happened. Things got difficult. And then something changed again. Those circumstances shifted. The rainbow changed its appearance. And that difficulty went away. Or perhaps the circumstances changed, but you wouldn't let it go. Experiences with friends and family are events. They're something that come into the sort of the sky of your relationship. If we're willing to open up, we can see that they're gone, or they could go, they could disappear, or shift into something else. Things were fluid, then they seemed fixed and solid, and then they could change again. Do you have an experience where a friend became a not friend? And then that not friend became a friend again? In these transitions, from friend to not friend to friend, there is constant movement, openness. Now bring to mind perhaps a circumstance with your work. Can you recall a time when things were fine with your work and then something like a cloud arose in that sky? Things got stuck. And then things became unstuck. Something else opened up again. You could even think back to last week in your work. Throughout the day, there's experiences of something arising. It seems real, imposing. We freeze up around it. It becomes realer, more threatening. And then something shifts again. We loosen up and it moves. Throughout our workday, there's times of fluidity and openness. Then a cloud comes into that sky. We tighten up. The cloud gets darker. We tighten up a little more. Now it looks like a wall, not a cloud. Then the circumstances change, we open up, we loosen up, and the weather changes. This is open quality. The fact that these experiences aren't solid, they're not continuous, they're full of space, full of gaps. They're full of in-between moments. Perhaps we can bring to mind a situation with our health. For some strange reason, things seem to be going fine for a while in terms of our health. Then something changes. Some new event in our body happens. We tighten up around that, and all of a sudden our whole life is about this particular health thing. And then it shifts again. Our entire body is the coming together of an infinite number of causes and conditions and circumstances. It shifts, our experience of body shifts, it shifts again. This is in between. Constant gaps, constant space, constant movement. It's the nature of things to change. Health, good health may change, and then we feel like something is in the way of that. That changes again. Maybe bring your mind to a mood that you had in the last days. Could be a good mood, it could be a bad mood, a dull mood, some kind of mood. Can you remember or notice that there was a time before you had that mood? And then that mood comes into the sky of our mind, and it looks like our whole life has changed. Our world becomes gray or fiery red. And then that mood changed. Or if you're in the middle of a mood these days, remind yourself that moods are exactly like rainbows. They're the coming together of perhaps something that someone said, something that's going on in our body, memories that have come up. Could be the season of the year. Moods are based on causes and conditions. A mood is not me. It's something that's arising in the sky of my mind. And moods shift. That's what moods do. Our whole life is like this. The movement, the coming together, the dissipating, various circumstances, causes, conditions, memories, things that someone said, events, something that we've seen, the chemistry of our body, just this soup of coming together. It's just one rainbow that appears and dissipates, appears again. There's space, there's openness, there's gaps all the way through, every moment. Now let's bring it down a little bit further. Bring your awareness to your breath. The breath is an event. It's a verb. It's something that is happening. Just follow your breath for a few breaths, in and out. Moving. As the breath goes out, before it comes back in, there's a little gap. Out again, and just notice the gap as you turn around from the exhale to the inhale. There's the inhale aspect, and then there's a gap, then there's an exhale, there's a gap. For those of you who are already doing a meditation practice and perhaps you're working with breath, an extremely helpful way to begin to touch into this gapacious, spacious, shifting, changing quality of our life, quality of reality, is on the out-breath. Just hesitate for a moment at the end of the out-breath. Just allow a quality of spaciousness, openness at the end of the out-breath. Let's just do this for a couple of minutes. Now let's bring it in even a little closer. Each thought that we have, in some ways a thought is the smallest bit of our experience. Every thought arises from who knows where. It comes for a moment and goes away, just for a minute or two. Just see if you can watch your thoughts. See if you can notice where they come from, how long they stay, and where they go. By doing this, we see that thoughts themselves are constantly moving. They stay for a matter of seconds. They come from the sky of mind. They appear as a bright or dark cloud, and then they disappear again, over and over and over again. In between every thought is space, is a gap. Each thought is simply a name that we put on an imagined form. There's nothing there. It arises, shifts, arises, disappears, arises, disappears. And yet we've become fixated on the thought itself. And we lose the perspective of the space between them, the gaps, the in-between. In losing the sense of the gaps, the space, the in-between moments, we take the thought as real. We take the very thing that is the least, that is completely impermanent, completely shifting. We take that as solid, real, and important, and not the space that is always around us, that hosts it, that allows it, that brings it into being, where everything returns, the openness, the space, the gap, the bardo. We place all our bets on the thought. And lose the space around it. Last night, Annie Pema mentioned something about the dying in everyday life. Allowing a thought or an impulse to arise and dissipate. This is the training in how to release in every moment. to use every moment as an opportunity to come back to the open space, the in-between, each thought is bookended by space. Each breath is surrounded by space. Each day is surrounded by space. All of our experiences are surrounded by space. This very life is completely filled with space, openness. Constant birth, constant death. This is what makes life possible. With this perspective, our seeming physical death in this life becomes something we understand. It's not a surprise, it's not an insult, it's not an ending. No more than the dissipation of one thought is an ending of our experience, or of one mood is the end of our experience. It's just simply another shift, another openness, another moment, another gap, another bardo. Okay. So Richard is going to guide us in some yoga, which is great. This afternoon we'll continue our discussion of meditation, and tonight we'll have plenty of time for questions. Great.
Good morning. You can stand up if you like. So welcome to everybody. This rainbow is called Shamatha Yoga, Shambhala Yoga. So for those of you who have not done this before, it's a series of 9 standing postures. And the Sakyong Mipam Rinpoche came up with this series. And it's yoga. There are words that we say, or I'll say them as we do the postures, and they're meant to be an evocation or an aspiration as you move. Okay, so we'll begin, and I'll do it slowly. The first time we'll do this series 2 or 3 times. So begin with your feet about hip-width apart and parallel. And just standing, if you're familiar with mountain pose in yoga, that's what this is. So earth. Feel the ground beneath you, your long spine, long back of the neck. And then inhale your arms up overhead. Bring the palms together, Great Eastern Sun. And then you'll bring the hands down to the heart, and you're gathering the mind, bringing heart and mind together. Exhale, you'll do a forward bend, offering. You're offering yourself up. So feel the back of your legs, let your head hang. Just let go. A perfect posture for letting go. Bend your knees, come back up. Courage. So you bring your hands to your hips and just look out and take in what's in front of you. And then we'll do warrior pose. You'll set your legs wide apart. You may want to stagger with each other. This is challenging, but we can do it. Turn your right foot out at 90 degrees and your left foot slightly pigeon-toed. And then turn your hips to face over the right leg. Inhale your arms up overhead, palm to palm, interlace. And bend the front knee and sink down. So in this warrior, we're letting go. Letting go of everything that we hold, our armor, sink down a little further, and then come back up, release your arms, and we'll reverse our feet. So turn to face over the left leg, turn your hips, raise your arms, interlace the fingers, and sink down on this side. And with your breath, breathing and sinking and letting go. Come back up. Bring both feet facing forward. So the warrior will move in 4 directions. Hands on your hips. Exhale, bow forward. Inhale, come back up. Bring your hands to your lower back, support it, and exhale, go back. Inhale, come back up. Turn the right foot at 90 degrees, face over that leg. Let's bow over that leg. Inhale, come back up. Reverse your feet again. Bow over the left leg. Inhale, come back up. So turn your feet again. So 90 degrees with the right foot, left foot pigeon-toed. I'm going to do a posture that you may know as triangle. Here it's called Garuda, so arms go out. In this case, your hips are facing forward. And you're going to imagine somebody's creasing your right hip. You're going to slide to the right. This always looks amazing to me to see you all doing this. Keep reaching. And then rotate the arms like a windmill and look up if you can. Breathe. So always come back to your breath. This is known as Garuda pose. Come back up. And let's reverse our feet. So Garuda is a bird that flies, and it never lands. So left hip is going to crease. So first just crease, 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 and then rotate. Reach long through your arms, open your chest. Come back up. Then bring your feet touching together. And we're going to join heaven and earth. Heaven, earth. In heaven and earth. Good. So that's one series. We'll do it again, and I'll do less talking. I'll just say the names, and we'll move a little more fluid. Earth. Be with your breath. Great Eastern Sun. Gather the mind. Offering. Courage. Warrior to the right. Turning over the hip, arms up, bend the knee. Letting go, letting go, letting go, and come back up. Reverse your feet. Warrior to the left. Strong, gentle, open, spacious. Sink down further. Come back up. Feet parallel, hands on hips. The warrior in 4 directions. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. So over the right leg. Exhale. Come back up. Reverse your feet. Exhale. Come back up. Turn your right foot out again. Now we're going to do Garuda, that bird. We're going to fly. 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 Reach. Breathe. back up, reverse your feet. Fly in the other direction. Fly with everybody in the room. Come back up. Feet together. Joining heaven and earth. Heaven, earth, heaven, earth. One more time. Heaven, earth. Rainbow's over. Thank you.
Good morning. Last night when I was going over with Tim a little bit about the Bardo practice or the remembrance practice, the practice of just remembering what came before, little vignettes of life, how that was like a past lifetime. And then what about right now, us sitting here? Last night I sat here, right, and I said that this would be a passing memory last night. Looks an awful lot like today somehow. And yet I'm sure a lot of you are in different seats, and a lot has happened to all of us between then and now. So we begin again, right? And we'll have this time together. And within it, there'll probably be little vignettes, particularly those of you who are daring to come to the microphone. You know, like you'll have the, I didn't hear a word she said because I was thinking about my question, and then going to the mic and asking it, and that whole thing, and then it's over, past. So when I was talking with Tim about this, he said, well, it's like a, I don't know if he said that this morning, but he said to me, it's like a contemplation on impermanence. And so I was thinking about it in terms of overcoming our fear of death. And I think overcoming our discomfort with impermanence is a good starting place. Actually beginning to be sort of poetic and creative and artistic about impermanence. This, seeing it as vignettes is almost like being a photographer or a writer or an actor, a dancer, where you begin to see things as little poignant, passing fragments that have often so much meaning and sometimes are very boring. And they have moods that go with them, and quality of the light and the sounds and the smells and the whole richness of it. And we begin to get more and more alive, I guess you could say, in becoming playful with impermanence, but making it or letting it be part of our life, that we actually notice that things are shifting and changing. I was recently talking to someone, actually an inmate. We were having a conversation. I had a visit. And he's interested in Buddhism and meditation. And he said, sometimes I really like that impermanence. And other times, I don't like it at all, depending, whether what's happening is pleasant or unpleasant. Unpleasant, you're really glad that it keeps moving. Pleasant, you wish that it wasn't so fleeting. But it really has nothing to do with your opinions. It just is, It just is like the air we breathe. Impermanence is the experience of all living things. And we're so conscious as a species that we can be very, very aware of it. So often, as you begin to be aware of impermanence, thinking of it as training in becoming familiar with the fleetingness, as becoming familiar with death, becoming more at ease, be able to relax with impermanence. But then people will always say, but it makes me so sad, or it makes me so anxious, or it evokes some kind of mood. Fear and sadness seem to be the ones I hear about the most, in terms of why we don't just do it all the time anyway, pay attention to the flow of life and the flow of our being. And so it really comes down to what I was touching on last night, is being able to hold, being able to feel big enough, spacious enough to hold our moods, sadness, anxiety. Like those two are just fleeting, just like Tim was talking about thoughts and emotions and moods, just fleeting, But we are so accustomed to feeling that somehow it shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't be feeling sad. I shouldn't be feeling anxious. I shouldn't be feeling what I'm feeling. And the truth is, that is what you're feeling. So, instead of rejecting it, having a value judgment about it shouldn't be like this. Just become familiar with the taste and smell and mood of loneliness, sadness, anxiety, irritation, impatience. Whatever it is that you say to people, well, I don't like to do this because it makes me sad, it makes me anxious, it makes me angry. So becoming familiar with that which we usually reject, that which we really usually wish wasn't happening. So in this regard, and in relationship with the moving along this morning with what the Tibetan Book of the Dead says happens next, are you on the edge of your seat? What happens next? You don't have to wait till you die. The Tibetan Book of the Dead tells you all about it. It's like a little preview of coming attractions. So there's a way of thinking about this, a way of thinking about discomfort and being able to hold it. By hold it, I mean allow it to be. This is what I'm feeling. This too is impermanent, shifting, and I don't have to really lay all my thoughts about it on top of that, just let it be what it is. Well, there's a way of thinking about this which I find very appealing, and so a lot of you may have already heard this, but never can hear it too often, right? So I came across this in a book about educating children. And it was a model where there was 3 concentric circles. And the center circle, kind of the bullseye, was called comfort zone. The next circle out, if you can visualize this, was called challenge zone. Comfort zone, then challenge zone. And the challenge zone, and this is part that caught my attention, was called challenge sort of slash learning zone. Challenge zone, learning zone, same thing. That's where the learning takes place. And then there was a third circle. I found this also quite helpful in terms of our spiritual path. And the third circle, the one on the outside, was called high risk zone. The idea being, and I'll talk about this, in order to grow, in order to learn, in order to not stay stagnant and stuck, it's important when life presents you with the challenge zone to step into it. Or maybe it's unavoidable. You can't help stepping into it. It just happens. And often that could be around death. You find out that you have a terminal illness, or that someone very dear to you has a terminal illness, or someone that's very dear to you has just died. Perhaps it was expected. Perhaps just one morning they were dead in the bed, or they got hit by a car, or something happened very unexpectedly and they were gone. And you just find yourself in the challenge zone. It's not comfortable. But then you could begin to look at it as this is where the learning takes place. This is where the growth takes place. The high risk zone is sometimes you have to step back, because once you're in the high risk zone, which simply means that you aren't ready for it yet, then learning doesn't happen. because it's too much for you at this particular time in your life. Too much. So personally, and I don't feel there's anything wrong with the comfort zone. And it's so comfortable. Secure, you know, you can relax. The problem is when you make it a way of life. Honestly, most of us have it in the front of our head or the back of our head, but somewhere in our mind, that if we could just do everything right, we could stay in the comfort zone forever, and that would be called the good life. I like to go to Maui. But the problem is, if you just opt, even though it's an interesting experiment in ignorance, that the human species tries to stay in the comfort zone permanently, and no one has ever even come close to achieving it. But somehow you just think that's because you made a wrong move, or you didn't understand well enough, or you blew it somehow. But if you could get all the pieces up, it seems like everybody else has managed. And of course, everybody else is thinking that about everybody else, which includes you. So the problem is that if you opt for comfort zone as a way of life, which is to say that when inevitably, always, the challenges come, but you run from them, you hide from them, you drink or smoke or do different things to try to get away from it, and you don't take the challenge zone as learning. So you don't have that view of it as good fortune. Difficult, not easy, but powerful and transformative. It's where the real growth happens. Whereas comfort zone is you need to relax. You need to be able to relax. And so you come home from work and you do whatever you do to relax. Comfort zone it out, you know. Hallelujah. As Leonard Cohen would say. But it's changing our attitude towards the challenge zone. Changing our attitude towards the challenge zone as precious, necessary, important. Because otherwise, the comfort zone begins to shrink, and less things bring us comfort, and more things seem like a challenge. It's called aging. Someone moves your lamp and you have a fit. Your comfort zone, instead of expanding and you being able to relax more and more as being a human alive on the planet every day in your life, instead of relaxing more and more, the comfort zone begins to shrink because you become more fearful of anything that might pull the rug out, interrupt the comfort. On the other hand, if when the challenges come, which they come every single day in little ways and bigger ways, when they come, if you take them as learning, It's just an attitude, really, you know. It doesn't make it any more comfortable. It's not like, oh, this is a way to smooth it out and then it won't be unsettling. No, it's still unsettling, but you have a view of it as something where the learning happens, where the growth happens. And if you take the challenges that way and allow them to transform you, which they will, then the comfort zone begins to expand, and what used to be challenging becomes comfortable. And so the ability to relax gets more and more. And then, of course, when the challenges come, I suppose if you were all hooked up to wires and things, you probably contract quite a lot and tense. But you open to it, you want to learn from it, you take the challenge, I guess you could say, knowing that it's also the learning zone. And then your relaxation begins to expand. And your curiosity begins to expand, your sense of being alive begins to expand. So I like this way of thinking about it, like a graphic, a diagram. And to me, when I read this, I thought this is very clear about what's problematic about trying to stay in the comfort zone all the time, and what's transformative about taking the challenge, living in the challenge, being worthy, changing your attitude, reframing your attitude towards the challenge. And then high risk. High risk doesn't mean, I was writing about this to a student and they wrote back and said, oh, well, they did high risk work. They worked with the homeless and spent a lot of time in very dangerous areas of the city. And they thought that's what I meant by high risk. But actually, I knew her really well, and that was all, fluctuated between being her comfort zone and her challenge zone, you know. But it wasn't a high risk zone because she had such enthusiasm for it, and she'd been doing the work for years, and she was happy doing that work. It felt so meaningful to her. High risk simply means right now for you personally, not necessarily forever, but for right now, it's too much. So somehow you try to find your balance, maybe go all the way into the comfort zone just to somehow find the ability to relax. So could it be that by how you live your life now, you could actually relax with impermanence? And you could relax when your own death comes, you could relax. And the key to relaxation is familiarity. When you're really familiar with something, you can relax, even if it's uncomfortable. And I think that's the challenge that I'm presenting, and just starting with impermanence and these gaps when nothing is actually, where there's no ground, just open space. Open space feels very refreshing for a little bit. But then when the space keeps going and you begin to try to hold on to something, and there's nothing to hold on to, it becomes unnerving. But you can begin to relax with that. Like me walking in the virtual reality on the board. I'm going to go back there. They're going to put that mask on me, and I am just going to walk confidently along there and step off. And the whole time I'm going to be saying to myself, you are on a board on the floor, that is, you know. And somehow I have an appetite for that. I want to go back and do it again. That doesn't mean I'll do any better, you know. But you see what I'm saying? It's like challenge zone, you begin, my experience is I've developed an appetite for the challenge zone. Believe me, they happen, even in Maui. You can't really escape, right? And that's the good news. So I wonder if there's any questions right now, so far. And I have a note to myself, written huge. It says, Jim, question and answer. I'm supposed to ask one time, I take questions from the online people, from Jim Cullender. And I forgot last night, so not quite yet. Go back. I wonder if they caught that on the camera. Hello.
Hello. Firstly, Annie Pema, I need to say thank you. Your teachings have been really healing for me in my life. So my question is about realizing some of these truths about spaciousness or relaxation with impermanence. Because when I sit down to meditate and do practice, I find that my conceptual mind wants to try and figure all this stuff out and understand it. And I just wonder, as you go along the path, do some of these things become more obvious and more clear? I'm not looking for reassurance, but I'm just curious to whether you get a sense of some of these things, like spaciousness, for example.
Mm-hmm. Are you saying that now it's just a concept?
To a degree, yes.
Yeah. Well, it's up to you what happens. If you're really curious, and you say, I'm going to devote this year to relaxing with a groundlessness, impermanence, spaciousness whenever it arises, or I'm going to do certain practices like the impermanence or Bardo practice, or I'm going to, do you know the practice that I have taught frequently called the pause practice? So that's kind of a space practice. You're just out walking, particularly when it's silent like this, and you just pause physically or just mentally, but physically is helpful, and you just look out, and it's a contrast to being all caught up in your mind. And you do that. And then also meditation, thinking, you're thinking and thinking and thinking, and then you recognize that you're thinking. And that's like, and go back to your breath, and there's a possibility there for a gap. So all of these, like pause practice, basic meditation instruction, you keep doing them, and then you have then the experience of spaciousness, say, just happens. But if you don't do any of the practices, and you're not committed to interrupting the momentum of your thoughts, does that make sense, that expression? If there's no commitment to, you're not wanting to make the thoughts bad, it's nothing like that. It's just you're curious, like, what's behind the whole thing? If I suddenly am not thinking, what will I experience? Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to just do things like pause, make a contrast between being all caught up and listening. And then moments happen like you almost fall, and then your mind just sort of stops for a moment. A car screeches to a halt, because you almost stepped in front. Things happen in our lives mild things and more bigger things that stop our mind, and you just notice that for a bit your mind stopped. And so you start to bring it into your awareness as a kind of, do you see what I'm saying? It's like trying to get the smell of it. So I always tell this story about my experience of it for the first time because it was so humorous in a way. And that was that I was meditating in a hall where there was a fan. Like that. And it was a long retreat. And so all day long, you'd be sitting, you hardly heard it. It's just going there. Shh. How does that sound? Like that. And I'm just sitting there meditating, and I'm feeling kind of, I guess the word would be poverty-stricken about the fact that people kept talking about the gap and spaciousness. And I didn't know what they were talking about. I never told them, of course. One of my darkest secrets. But I was sitting there and it was going, and all of a sudden, it got turned off for just a moment and then came back on, and I said, that's it. And it was such a revelation because it was so simple. It was just, So that happens a lot in life, doesn't it? So I've just given you spaciousness transmission. But you see, that only happened because I was wanting to know, and I was doing everything that the instructions said. And then, otherwise, I think I wouldn't have even noticed that there was a gap there when they turned it off. Do you see?
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you. I had to write my question down because I knew that I would need the reference. The wisdom of the Bardo makes sense to me. It has even shed light on the concept of impermanence in regards to grief. We touched on this yesterday discussing the letting go, the letting be, and the story of the calligraphy store and your lunch with your friend. Because I clung to grief and I thought the Tibetan masters were all wrong and that grief really was permanent. But in this teaching, I can accept and understand its beginning, its dwelling, and then its end, even though it may return. I have experienced a lot of death and grief in my life, making this concept of grief as not permanent state of mind and heart. I'm beginning to work with teens who are struggling with the death of a family member. Sadly, many of these cases, the deaths have been sudden, accidental, dramatic, and traumatic. I believe the idea of the Tonglen practice would make sense to these young people. However, when there isn't the dying phase of the Bardo, as we have been discussing, the sorrow runs so deep it takes residence in these young hearts. Can you share any guidance with me how to gently begin to help these kids with allowing the grief when they really just want to ignore it and suppress it? I also struggle with the lack of time society allows the grieving. Too often they are back to work, school, activities, and with little time to go inward with their emotions.
Do you feel that you yourself have come to experience that it's not just like a seamless, solid thing, that there's gaps in it, in the grieving, your grieving, and that with time it shifts and changes? It's not like it goes away forever, but the intensity and the overwhelm of it. Has your own experience been that?
I thought I had done that until a recent death, a sudden traumatic death that really knocked me off my practice.
Yeah.
And brought up a lot of doubt about what I thought I knew.
Right.
But as I've been reading this, I do see that it's intense, it's difficult, it's hard to let it be. It's hard, let it go, let it be, and it doesn't ebb and flow like the Bardo. I think I've come to that recently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's keeps us humble. Life does. Like we think we've understood something, and then we get hit by a big wave, right? And I always think of that as keeping us humble. That we, not like we failed or we did something wrong, but that it kind of reminds you how this is not so trivial, and you just don't come up with a good idea and it takes care of everything. It's actually a process. And the words that I say, that Tim says, are just like pointing you to your own wisdom. And you find out for yourself what actually works. But in a way, in terms of working with the children, the young people, the teens, that's a great blessing that you got knocked off your practice by the intensity of that death, recent death, because it sort of puts you in their shoes completely, rather than the wise one who's going to impart the information, So then you go back to square one, and you start to practice what you've been telling them. And you see, does it really work? Does it help? Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So the basic instruction always is, and it's not just from meditation teachers or Buddhists, but in general, the instruction always is to be with the grief, allow yourself to grieve, know the grief, in no way reject it, in no way. So somehow that's what allows it, the impermanence, to keep happening. Of course, impermanence is happening, but sometimes we have this magical ability to sort of freeze it as if it's not happening, and we get stuck in grief or rage or different emotions. We get stuck in them, which is just an illusion where it's really not stuck. It's just our minds and hearts are frozen around it. But we can't belittle that or say, oh, then we're making a mistake or something, because that's our reality when the grief really strikes. So by you yourself working with it, then it's just like taking, if the young person allows you to take their hand and just say, I know what you're feeling, something about talking human to human instead of being the counselor, and just saying, this is what has helped me, and I know it will help you too, And then giving them any ways, skills, to actually do that. Because sometimes, particularly traumatic, dramatic deaths to young people and older people as well, you just find yourself in the high-risk zone. You don't really choose to go there. It's not like you're pushing something. It's just where life throws you. So you find out how much comfort zone is needed at that point and where it comes from. And do you see, to find some kind of balance to keep you more in to let the challenge of death become more something you can embrace and learn from. Because the real truth is that at the relative level, and Tim may have said this, at the relative level, their father or mother or sibling has just been shot or OD'd or whatever happened. And they're gone, and this might have been someone very beloved to them. But for sure, at the absolute or infinite or ultimate level, nothing has died. That consciousness goes forward and is deathless. When you touch into that It's like, an example would be the sky. Last night, I used the example of the sun and the clouds moving away from the sun. And then there it is, when the dissolution happens, then the sun shines brightly. Actually, the sun is also impermanent, we've been told. And, but space is not. Space, as you know, you can go out into it in a spaceship, but you never can get to the end of it. In that movie, The Martian, they said it was like 10 years or something to go from Mars back again and back. The journey took 10 years, but that's just Mars, you know, that's just our solar system. You can never get to the end of space. So that's inconceivable for our minds, something that you could never get the end of. But that's what deathlessness is. When you connect with that, you realize that, of course, bodies just come and go, you know, life after life. But there's something deathless that continues. And that's like space. Like, it's not an entity that continues, it's a connecting with the vastness that is actually the nature of our mind as well as space. So I don't think you can in any way convey any of that to them.
Probably not.
I kind of went off on a tangent there. But I guess it's that what's comforting to you, you share that with them. What allows you to get up in the morning and go to school, and teach, or counsel, you share that with them. And so you share from your heart, person to person, human to human. And I think that's what can be heard.
Thank you.
Sorry for the tangent.
Thank you, Pema.
You're welcome.
I wrote my question as well. And you may have answered part of it in that you said that consciousness goes forward, but I'm getting more and more confused. So if our consciousness dissolves into space and there's no distinct I, what gets reincarnated? I mean, it's like a drop of water in the ocean, and then how does that one little drop get returned to another form?
Right.
You understand?
So actually, it's an illusion. The whole thing is an illusion. So actually nothing gets reincarnated in the way that I was talking about last night, because there's nothing that stays the same. Going through the bardo, going through life, nothing stays the same. It's always, that's the thing, you know. For us to get in touch with the shiftingness, the fluidity, that the movement of it, the dynamic quality of it, rather than static quality of it. So this changing, shifting, never the same consciousness, it has the nature of wide open space that's always shifting, but at the same time, interestingly enough, propensities. It carries propensities. They aren't, it's not, so someone said, live your life as if you're setting up a good situation for the future you. You know? And that future you is, in the future you is not going to be a nun wearing Tibetan robes called Pema Chodron, you know. In my case. Your case too. It'll be something completely different. And, but the propensities, they go through. You see what I'm saying? It's interesting. It's like the tendencies, the habits. but they don't belong to anybody. And then the consciousness is drawn into a body, and those propensities go along with it. But it's the idea of a you or a permanent entity that is completely inaccurate. So it's the same thing as doing a contemplation about, are you the same you that was born as an infant? When you look at those baby pictures and toddler pictures and stuff, are you the same person? Well, yes and no, right? I mean, like, you have the same birthday.
Yes.
You know, you were born, and I was born July 14th, 1936, but I don't really recognize those pictures, you know, as me.
Right.
But on the other hand, I can't say it's not, but I can't say it is. Right. And actually, in terms of the whole body, everything has changed. Nothing's the same. There's nothing the same except there's the propensities.
Okay.
And in a lifetime, you have the opportunity to lighten up those propensities, the negative ones that get you in trouble.
Okay.
And then that's what, so maybe nothing goes through at all, even no propensities. That would be called enlightenment. But,
Thank
you know,
you. Yeah.
I don't know if that's,
It
it's hard
helps
to...
me not be so confused.
Okay, well, that's good. Instead of more confused, I'm glad to hear it. You know, when my son and daughter were, they're not Buddhists, and they've always been friendly about it, you know, I guess I could say. They haven't, like, given me a hard time. But when they were, I think, 18 and 16 or something, I took them to meet a Buddhist teacher that was so special to me, the 16th Karmapa, he was called. And for me to be able to actually introduce them to him was like very special. So they were willing to go along and, you know, humor their mother. And so we were alone in a room with him, and they sat down. They brought along a friend, so there were 3 of them, 3 teenagers. And then I asked the Karmapa if he could say something to them, and he spoke only Tibetan. So through a translator, he started giving a sort of like a Buddhist little talk to them. And after a little bit, when he paused, I said to the Karmapa, with all respect, the children are not Buddhists. And is there something you could say to them that would be meaningful, recognizing that they're not Buddhists? And he looked at them very intensely, and he was close to them, and he said, "You're going to die." And he said, and you won't take anything with you but your state of mind. So that's kind of like the propensities I'm talking about. And that was such a profound teaching, you know, and they never have forgotten it, especially because it was kind of the last thing they were thinking of at their age, you know.
Thank
and
you.
So, you're welcome.
Hi. I'm definitely in a challenge learning concentric circle.
That's being up at the mic?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Last night when we were talking about death, it seemed to me we were talking about some very luxurious deaths.
Mm-hmm.
But there are deaths that happen so suddenly.
Yeah.
You know, 2 guys are in a foxhole and one guy's talking and boom, he's dead.
Yeah.
What happens to the to the bardo, what happens to the transition when there's no time. It seems that time is an important element in what you're talking about. And it just leaves me, confused.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like there are other things that I've heard in Buddhism, like look deeply into the flower. Well, what if you're blind?
Yeah.
Well, there are things
Yeah.
that just don't fit.
Don't fit.
Fit somehow. So
Challenge zone things.
can you help me?
Right? They don't.
Yeah, they just don't fit. They sound great. They sound fantastic, but they don't quite seem to work.
Yeah, they're good.
my
Yeah,
body.
that's great. Because this is how these teachings work. You hear them, something clicks or doesn't click, but let's say it clicks. And so you think really, wow, and that's kind of like it, but no. That's the introduction. We haven't even gotten to chapter 1. And then you have to start practicing. And then when you start to practice, you get into this it doesn't quite fit thing. Because you had a concept of what it meant, and it's not fitting with your life. And then you either give up, and that's the end of the story, or you keep practicing until it's your own truth, and then it fits. Like, you have a sense that there was truth in that statement that Pema Chodron said at the retreat. But it's not fitting. And therefore, but it becomes a contemplation, and you find how it fits. And it doesn't fit according to your preconceived conception of how it's going to fit, because it always sounds great. It always sounds easy. And it sounds like the comfort zone, And it's the comfort zone, but we call it the challenge zone. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I give myself a lot of credit, but actually we're really comfortable in what we're calling the challenge zone. This not fitting, that's learning. That's a learning place. That's where the teachings become real and not just something in a book or something you hear. So they say that first you hear it, then you contemplate it deeply, which is integrating it. Then you meditate on it. It becomes more and more your own discovery of truth. So it's like a light bulb going off. So the sudden death, it's interesting because usually human beings say, oh, I would like to have a sudden death, just get it over with. But it is true that having the time is a blessing, because then you could, like Judith, pointing to the mouth and pointing to the eye and just feeling it all happening, tracking it, knowing what was going to come next and the opportunity for enlightenment. But there's ways that people train, like now, for you, for instance. So it's not theoretical, talking about somebody else. You begin to train. Do you know the story about Gandhi was assassinated? Suddenly his guard turned on him and shot him, and his last word was Ram, the name of God. Right. And so in the same way, you can train that when you slip on the banana peel, when you spill ink down your new white shirt, when the doctor tells you you don't have long to live, whether it's little or big, you train in first thought is some equivalent of Ram. I've been training myself, Ram meaning what Gandhi said. So, for instance, I've been training myself to say Om Mani Padme Hum, like it's the mantra of compassion, so that it's just first thing that comes out of my mouth. Now, Trungpa Rinpoche was very funny. He had a great sense of humor. And he said, train in what you say when there's a sudden shock or a sudden disappointment or things, out of nowhere, you don't like what has happened. And he said, usually when those things happen, you say O-F. Or maybe O-S-H. And he said, you know, that wouldn't be very good if that was the last thought you ever had. So he said, try something like, wow. So it doesn't have to be a mantra. It can be just shifting. So what I find is I've already said O-F, and then I backtrack a little and I say, wow. You know, like there's a little bit of a time lap there. But I'm training for last thought at death, and especially if it's going to be like sudden. And then it's kind of all encapsulated in your frame of mind when you die. Because some, it comes like the bomb, no warning at all. Car accident, there's a moment before you see that it's just about to happen. And so at least you have time to say, wow, or Om Mani Padme Hum, or Ah La La, or Ram, or whatever positive state of mind. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to tell you that your life is very precious to me.
My life?
Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
This will be the last one for this time, and then I'll go on with the teachings, and the others can stay. And Jim, you can come out when I start with the next one, but stay in there now. Oh, you want to come right now? Okay. Okay, maybe you're right. I won't, though. I have this huge sign.
All right. So,
all right.
We got a lot of questions from the online audience, and it's hard to pick which one is best, but I thought I'd start with this one.
Okay.
Came in from last night.
Okay.
You were speaking about how the Tibetan worldview is just one worldview.
Yeah.
You don't have to believe it or not believe it.
Yeah.
And there are many ways to think about what happens to us after we die.
Yeah.
And this question was kind of simple. It says, what encouraged you to believe in the Tibetan worldview of reincarnation?
Oh, good question. What did? Karma? I'm not sure. You know, had I actually had a rational choice, I would have chosen Zen. I like the aesthetic. It's so simple, clean, you know, beautiful, simple shrines. I would not have chosen brocade, gold, kind of gaudy, very, lot of noise. And Zen people are very quiet. I like that. Tibetans, the joke is Tibetans, Theravadins, and Zen people go on a retreat together. Zen people are sitting in Zazen like the whole time. Theravadins are out doing very mindful walking meditation. Tibetans are down ice skating or something. So I don't know how it happened, because I just never would have rationally chose it. But I met Chogyam Trungpa. I guess that's how it happened, you know. And I was suffering, and he wrote an article called Working with Negativity, which said there's nothing wrong with negativity. It's just stay with the energy of it and don't spin off. And I said, woo, this is the best thing I've read, you know. I'd been grieving for a couple of years. And so it was because of him, I guess, you know. I didn't know at the time what I was getting into. And so along with him came the Tibetan view of the dying. Mm-hmm. And you know, like that. When
you sit in meditation, and as everyone knows here that you've been meditating for the past year,
yeah.
Did you have any particular experience in meditation that indicated to you that something like this does happen?
Like what the Tibetan book says?
Yeah.
Well, I because of my age, I'm sure, no secret about that, that my main study during the retreat was the Bardo teachings. And I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and my closest friend died during the retreat. And so I got so much into being with her for the whole 49 days and talking to her and reading to her from the book and having conversations with her and encouraging her, it became very real to me. And I'm not sure that I think it all happens exactly like it's described, but that we go through a Bardo transition and then a reborn, that makes a lot of sense to me, because it's a lot to me like going to sleep at night. That's the analogy that makes sense to me. Like when you go to sleep at night, you enter into a whole different way of being, deep sleep and dreaming. Then you wake up and you're back in this reality. And I somehow think that Bardo is like a dreaming state.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. You still get to ask your question. Can I tear it up now? No, I need it for tomorrow. Yeah. Thank you, Jim.
Hello. I feel so fortunate to be here today. It's so uncomfortable coming up here, and yet there's just something in me that always gets called to come to the mic because of what I received just by standing here and kind of thinking about my questions. Yeah. So I come anyway to ask. First, my one experience I wanted to share this morning in the meditation was the pause at the bottom of the exhale, or the space, is a practice I do quite regularly and something I teach. And this morning, there was anxiety there, and there was not spaciousness. And Tim was mentioning, like, I heard him say this, feel the space, be in the space at the bottom of the out-breath, and the spaciousness, and it was just so uncomfortable. And I'm so grateful for it, because now when I teach it, it's going to give me an intimacy of experience that maybe I hadn't touched on before, as if everyone just feels comfortable at the bottom of the out-breath.
Right, right.
So thank you for that. And then my question's pretty much been answered from your teaching today and the questions that came before. And it had to do around the experience of suffering. And
Suffering?
Suffering, yeah. And it's something I've been working with a long time, and it's great suffering around animals. And I always ask teachers about it, just to see what your teaching might be for me, because I have this great suffering around the suffering of animals, for whatever that reason is. And the little diagram was very helpful in the zones, because I had this great idea one time in meditation that I would offer some of the work to workers that work on the lines at some of the agro-farming, where they're having to slaughter the animals. And I was like, wow, like there's no way I could possibly do that. And that was like, there's this high-risk zone for me that I can't go to. And one day I was on the bus, and looking at the passing landscape, I saw my eyes going to try to find animals that were like lost or running around or didn't have a home. And I said to myself, I can't do that. I actually can't do that. So I kept my vision up just to experience the pain but not fall into it. So I don't know what to do with it. When is it okay to go to the high-risk place? Will I ever? And then I'm interested now, after this weekend, in, well, I'm suspicious that there's got to be something about my own death that's
Connected with the animal.
Yeah.
Maybe so. But I would say that was a good instinct you had, that you would raise your gaze, so you had more a sense of the whole planet and space outside, or whatever, however big it got for you, but just to give yourself more, not be so overwhelmed. Anything you could do to not be so overwhelmed, but to stick with it, still keep dedicating merit to the animals. Whenever you're probably vegetarian, but are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, but whenever you see meat in the grocery store, or your friends or family are eating meat or anything, just say, may these animals never again endure the suffering of being an animal, but may they attain full enlightenment. Just make big aspirations for them to be free of suffering. But whenever it happens, make positive aspirations for them. And what you'll find is that it's best to stay out of the high-risk zone, but what you'll find is what used to be high-risk zone will become challenge zone by the very nature of sticking with it, but giving it space so that you don't get overwhelmed. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And also, like we used to sing this song at Gampo Abbey when Tim was the director there, and it went, there was a teacher who was driving a student in a car, and lots of insects were smashing against the windshield and being killed. And the driver just stopped the car and said, I just can't go on, I'm killing so many insects. And the teacher began to sing, and he sang this song that went in English, like, all these sentient beings that I have a good or bad connection with, may they be born in a pure realm and have a joyful life, like that. So you could call it a bad connection because they're coming up against your windshield, and you're the cause of their death. So you turn it into wishing them the best. Just because there's that connection between you and them, it becomes a positive connection because of your wishes for them. Do you see what I'm saying? So for them to be free of suffering and to have happiness and the causes of happiness. So what you were saying about raising your gaze, just keep doing those kind of things that make it possible for you to not, it's not possible for you to give up on the animals anyway, since it's so much a part of you, right? So just find every way you can to stick with it without it turning into overwhelm.
The other day, I practiced it at PetSmart. Normally, I can't even bear to be nearby the animals that they have on display or whatever.
Yeah.
I just have to go by very quickly.
Yeah.
And I decided to buy some food for them, and I chose to go over to where they were, the cats were, and I gave them the food, and that was something shifted a little bit in me.
So you're the only one really who knows what will work, and you just keep trying to find ways to make it work.
Okay, thank you.
So let me go on. And today, I wanted to tell you what the Book of the Dead says happens next. And so the book is written in the form of a conversation with the person that's died. And for instance, when the dissolving is happening, you can whisper in their ear, now the dissolving of earth into water is happening, and now the water is dissolving into the fire. And so kind of putting it in a context why they're feeling thirsty or heavy or cold. So it says things like, "O son or daughter of noble family, that which is called death has now arrived. So you should say to yourself, I have arrived at the time of death, and so now, by means of this death, I will adopt only the attitude of the enlightened state of mind, as well as friendliness and compassion. And I will do this for the sake of all sentient beings as limitless as space." So you whisper things like that into their ear for the whole 49 days. You just keep reminding them of what's happening. So they say that there is this possibility when the clouds all go and then the space is there, the sky is there, unclear sky is there without any clouds. There is the opportunity to just relax into that, and it's called full awakening or attaining enlightenment. And the book is rather humorous in a way because it says basically something along the lines, just do what I'm telling you here, and there's no way that you're not going to attain enlightenment. and then it tells you what to do. And then the next thing it says is, but on the chance that you missed it, now here's another chance. So it's called, the second chance book. You keep getting second, third, fourth, fifth, ultimate chances. They keep giving you, say, okay, any dummy can do this, just say what I say and just do it. And then, but if you happen to miss it, now here's something else you can do. So if you miss that at the end of the dissolve, then a very interesting things happen. Sometimes they say you go unconscious for a little bit, like a couple of days perhaps, just like almost like getting a shot and they put you under and it's just blank, gone. And then when you come to, you're in an interesting state because you're still in that very open state of mind. You're not, it's not like we are now with our strong sense of a self and self-referencing. It's still wide open mind and heart. And then that wide open mind and heart begins to, it's almost like be the projector of seemingly outer reality. That outer reality comes in the form of brilliant lights, like rainbow lights, and little discs of light. And they say sheets, like sheets of light. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I think I'd love that. Sounds beautiful. But what the text says is that it's so intense, the colors are so vivid and intense, and the sounds are very, very loud. Trungpa Rinpoche said, like the sound of all the musical instruments in the universe being played simultaneously. And so it's very much a challenge zone, apparently, because it's not cozy, it's not comfortable. You feel, you don't feel drawn to it because it's so intense. I found that extremely interesting idea. Then it says the lights can then begin to take form. And these forms are like wisdom beings, seemingly, but actually it's all just the projection of your own mind. Like when you're dreaming at night and you have the whole reality, but if you do lucid dreaming, if you ever wake up in the dream, you're very aware that it's all just a projection of your mind. Very real, but seemingly, but you know that it isn't. And in the same way, when you're in, now it's called the Bardo of Dharmata, which means, dharmata means suchness, or things just as they are. So in this particular bardo, which comes after the bardo of dying, the dissolution and the bardo of dying, in this particular bardo, there's all these lights and then visions of wisdom beings who come in very brilliant colors. And this would depend completely on your belief system, your cultural orientation, what you would actually see. But in any case, they would be like wisdom beings. But instead of being just drawn to them, which you would think would be the case, instead it says that it's very, very challenging because of its intensity. So this is like challenge zone. It's not high risk zone. It's challenge zone. And if you have no practice in it during your life, then you would not be drawn to these sounds and colors and beings. But if you're practiced with challenge, then you would be able to relax and open to them. So then a very interesting thing, it says, at the same time as these brilliant lights, one first comes, I think the sequence is first white, like a white wisdom being, brilliant, luminous white light. And then next one is blue. And they say it's come for a whole day, one lasts, and then for a whole day, the next one lasts. But we don't really know how long a day is. It could be like that, you know. Then there's red one, then a yellow one. So white, blue, yellow, white, blue, yellow, red, and green. And so it says at the same time there are these piercing, challenging sounds and colors that you could relax and open into, and that's another opportunity to have full awakening, according to the Book of the Dead, by just realizing it's your own projection and relaxing and opening to it, as you may have been training in your life about all the different challenges that have come up. But at the same time, there is a cozy light. So when there's the brilliant blue light, I forget what the cozy color is, but the practice, it doesn't really matter what color it is, it's very kind of muted and soft and familiar, and it draws you. And it draws you right back into suffering. So you have like, the way they present it is in the Bardo of Dharmata, you are either drawn towards what's challenging, because in your life you've trained in that, or you just get taken right into the cozy, familiar, like what represents a comfort zone. And so basically the person who's whispering in your ear says, don't go towards the dim light. Honey, oh son or daughter of noble family, don't go towards that dim light. I know it's attractive, but believe me, you know, let the other one pierce you to the heart and just relax with it. Please, I beg of you. Something like that. What it actually says is, now when the bardo of Dharmata dawns upon me, I will abandon all thoughts of fear and will recognize whatever appears as my own projection and know it to be a vision of the bardo. Now that I have reached this crucial point, I will not fear my own projections. And so that's the kind of thing that you read to the person. Or you say, this was in the first person, but you can say, now that you have reached this crucial point, do not fear your own projections. And so what they say in the book is that at this point, your consciousness is 7 times more sensitive and receptive than ours is now. So on the one hand, these kind of instructions, you get it and you follow it because you have so much more understanding, as particularly if you were familiar with ideas in your lifetime. On the other hand, left to your own devices, the draw of the propensity might be equally strong, 7 times stronger. So very interesting kind of situation. This is why I brought up the comfort zone and the challenge zone, because not only, well, so even if you don't have any trust in the validity of this, it's best instruction for now. The other thing that's said is, actually, because there is no solid you at this point, never has been anyway, but there definitely is not now, it isn't you that makes the choice to go, there isn't an entity that makes the choice to go towards the challenge and not towards the dim, comforting, cozy. It's your pre-existing propensities that go with you. Your propensities will either, just as now actually, they draw you one direction or the other. But right now we have a choice. We can feel ourselves being drawn in, and we can, you know, have this little angel on our shoulder saying, Ani Pema, bad idea, don't go there. Devil on the other side, right, saying, Ani Pema, cozy is good. And you begin to realize that you have a choice there. And it's only because, so whatever propensities you take with you, that's what's going to make the choices. Does that scare you? Scares me. Because I realize the only way to know is like, what propensities draw me now? How do I get drawn in now? So at this stage, they say, just to reiterate, after having the brilliant luminosity of mind just revealed to us and being able to join with it completely, the mother and child luminosity meeting, if you miss that, then there's the second opportunity to open and relax and join with the bright lights of the wisdom beings. First, you get the chance with white. If you miss that, any dummy could do it with blue, but should you miss that, there's never on the planet that missed red, but in case you do, there's yellow. It's very compassionate, actually. But our life is like that, too. We get all these opportunities, but where do our propensities draw us? Well, now we can work with those propensities. I think that's, for me, in reading all this, it isn't that I come away with this saying it's going to be exactly like this and I believe this, but it's a sense of, it makes a lot of sense to me that my propensities are going to either get me in trouble or draw me towards wisdom, and I would like to cultivate now the ones that draw me towards love and compassion, draw me towards our interconnectedness, don't draw me towards continuing to suffer with the illusion of separateness and continually to build prejudice and bias. So, but should you miss the whole thing, which apparently most of us do, then you go unconscious. And then tomorrow I'll tell you what happens next. And in the meantime, Tim will give you the instruction on how to work with developing a compassionate heart. So your first impulse, it grows. Maybe that's not your first impulse now, but by the time you die, because of how you've worked with your mind and your emotions, your first impulse is empathy and love and caring about others. And your first impulse is to go towards the challenge of the brightness and spaciousness and groundlessness of open space. Getting used to nothing to hold on to takes a lot of courage. And we have the rest of our lives to develop that courage. So are there more questions? I think they'll raise it up for you.
So I didn't write down my question, so my apologies if I forget what it is. But your teachings have really clicked with me today and yesterday. I recall when I first came here on Friday, I was talking to somebody and they were saying, you know, Pema's going to be teaching about death. And my first reaction was, oh, bummer. Now I know it should have been, wow.
Exactly.
And it really has been a wow. And let me talk a little about why that is. I'm on the verge of retirement. And, you know, for 30 years I've been working, actually more than that, but, and I've been thinking about retirement and thinking about it, and it just scares me to get out of where I know, you know, where I live, sort of today. But last night when you were talking about the stages of death, of not thinking, not speaking, not hearing, it really clicked with me because a couple of weeks ago, as I was sitting in a meeting, I was thinking, I don't know how to think about this stuff anymore. I don't see what I used to be able to see when we were in problem-solving sessions. And I don't speak as much as I used to speak. And I recognize that that is because my mind has sort of shifted to where I want to go next in my life. And I kind of think about it as I want to go, but I'm afraid to take that step into what you deem as spaciousness. And part of that is because I worry about if I get stuck in sort of that comfort of spaciousness and don't take that next challenge to my next life, where I really want to be an artist and write and do those kinds of things.
What is it you want to do?
I want to be an artist,
Yeah.
a writer, a painter. That's the kind of part of myself that I put aside as I went about being a corporate being. So curious your thoughts around making sure that as we get into that gap between what we are now and what we are to become, how do you know, or how do you think about the length of time and when you should start thinking about really challenging yourself to move forward?
Well, isn't retirement a bardo? I have a number of students that are retiring, and I get these letters from them about, it sounds like total bardo. Their whole identity was tenured professor at university or something like this, or whatever it was, janitor. But they've all been doing that for years, and so the bardo of retiring, it's supposed to represent, wow, now I have all the time to do what I want to do. But it's a real identity crisis, right? So take it as such, you know. Let your identity crisis. And the question is, if I'm not this corporate being that I've been for the last 30 years, who am I? Then you say, oh, artist. That's who I am. Well, what is that? And is it going to be comfort zone? Is it going to be high risk? Are you going to have writer's block and
As much as I do today.
painter's block, you know? Will it be relaxing, going into your older age, retiring and being able to relax? In, you know, in like Hindu tradition, that's when you start your spiritual life. that whole time is set aside for deeper spiritual as you go more towards the end of your life. But we don't have any such notion in our culture, and so it's just big unknown. And so, for instance, my two students that are retiring, they both think, oh, I'm going to practice a lot. But now they're retired, and they find that they took their mind with them. And so they're both very, very busy and accomplishers and everything. And even though they have all this time now, and they're all filled up with, they're not sitting more, they're not practicing more, they are overwhelmed the same way they were when they were working. So rather than getting lost in the spaciousness, I think more, what's the mind you're going to be taking with you? And is that really a fixed identity in any case? So it's a little like dying, very much like dying. Dying to the corporate life, you, that one, which according to what we've been saying was never permanent and fixed to begin with, but seemed so. And now you're in a more, let's say, closer to the truth, that you're in a, I don't know who I am. I don't know really who I am or what's going to happen or who I'm going to be. It's a very, very, very fertile place for the spiritual, a person who is longing to awaken. And so then you'll probably find, just like the description of death today, where do your propensities draw you back into what's familiar and cozy, which is the same corporate mind but around other projects? Instead of painting, you become the head of the painters' union or something. Instead of writing, you decide to edit all your friends' books or, whatever. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's going to be the challenge, is you will take those propensities with you and to recognize them as such and to keep stepping out of those. Keep going towards the challenging light rather than the dim and cozy light. I love that as an analogy, actually. It's presented as that's actually what you see, but as an analogy, I find it so evocative. The dim, cozy light drawing you, and then the more brilliant, awake, vibrant light challenging you, It's nothing to hold on to here. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think it's a great place to be.
I do too.
Okay. The bardo of retirement. What is the piece of paper you hand everybody that when they...
It's a poem.
Oh. It says, I hereby promise that I won't freak out when I see myself on television. And I won't sue Omega.
Hello.
Hello.
I just love you, as I'm sure many people in this room do. So I just want to thank you for making yourself available to us. Mine is kind of similar to hers in that it's a phase of life question. I don't mean to bring up anything painful. I'm sure you're long past it, but I read in the Shambhala Sun, they had a special edition for your 80th birthday. And there was your life story, one of the sections was. And there was a very cryptic sentence that said something like, I forget, it was something about when you took your vows while your children were still young.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a teeny phrase like, she may have done it differently. She says now she may have done it differently, something like that.
Teeny little phrase.
It was so small. And I was like, oh. So as a householder, mother, caretaker, I am sure, like others, I hear about you taking a year of meditation and solitude. I have this great yearning, but I was wondering if you had just some words of encouragement for those of us who are still doing so much doing.
Young children?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do it well. Do it well and thoroughly, and enjoy it as much as you can, because it goes very fast. And suddenly they all gone, you know. And with their own lives, just the way you had your own life, you left home, and they go too. So now it seems very permanent, you know, like they're 2.5, it feels like for 4 years, you know. And it's a lot of work. And do you also have a job or just at home?
Yes, and I mean, my kids are getting a little bit older, but I just know that I'm not alone when I feel this, like, yearning for more space, but pulling, knowing that I have to do it well.
Yeah, that's right. So you'll get, if the yearning is genuine, then, which I'm not questioning that, but let's just say if the yearning has like strong determination behind it, or something like that, then you don't abandon this phase of your life to try to go off like I did, actually, and just do this whole spiritual thing. I mean, my kids were 13 and 15, young. Mm-hmm. Too young, you know, and I've learned a lot about my mistakes. But, so don't follow my example, you know, but follow that yearning. And so right now, with the busy life, you just make some time. You made the time to come to the weekend. You make some time. I know it's not easy, but how old are they?
17, 15, 13, and 7.
Wow. So they all go to school. And so what I'm saying is seize the moments that you have and see if you can do 10 minutes of meditation a day. For some people, that almost seems impossible. For other people, 45 minutes is possible. You know, it depends. But if you don't start now, when you have the time, you almost schedule in the time. And if you don't do it now, then you're not going to do it when suddenly they're all gone, because you haven't developed the propensity to do it. The future is never different than the present in terms of propensities. Unless you change the propensities, that's what makes the future different. But if you just keep not doing it now, you're not going to do it then. So do you see what I'm saying? So now's the time, even if it's 10 minutes. But when you find yourself and you have some time, just do the sometimes difficult thing of, instead of turning on the television or doing something else, that you sit down and you put on your timer and you sit for 10 minutes. You see? And you just start doing that now, and then maybe it starts to grow bigger, and you go to more retreats where there's more meditation. But as they get older, it gets easier and easier. But you're not going to do it then if you can't do anything now. So that's my threat.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Pema.
Hello.
I'm very honored to be here. I'm from Belgium, and when I was 9 years old, Mother's Day, we used to stand on a chair, and we would read our Mother's Day letter to our mom. And I remember my mother had a big stomach, and I remember her, I thought she might be pregnant. I stood on the chair, and I read my letter, and my mother started to cry. And I didn't know what was going on. So my father told me to go sit down, and my mother left, and my father left. And she went to the hospital. I didn't say goodbye. She went to the hospital. And then we would visit her once a week. I was 9, my sister was 10, my brother was 12, and my other brother was 13. One day in the summer, my father sat us down. We had a sauna at the time, and we had a swimming pool. And I was one of those lucky ones. I had a swimming pool. And he chose the sauna for us to sit down, and we were wrapped in a towel. And he said, "Your mom is going to die in 2 months. That's the maximum time she has." And we cried. And then he said, "You know, you're all going to go to boarding school in September. You're all going to go to boarding school in September." So we went to boarding school. I was 9. I was going into 4th grade. And my mother passed away in November. And I remember my father coming to the principal's office. And he didn't cry. He just turned his head down. And I wasn't sure whether I was allowed to cry or not, because nobody ever talked about my mother being sick. People would say, "Shh, you know, Pascal is in the room," or "My sister was in the room, let's not talk about it." And I remember the funeral, we sat in the front, everybody was looking at us, and I felt the pity of the whole world on me. And nobody ever talked about my mother. Not my aunts, not my father. It was something that, in those days, I wore a black, we were supposed to wear a black jacket with a ribbon, the black ribbon, for a year. And my father said they'll wear it for 6 months, and not for a year, and they'll wear gray for only 6 months, but not for a year. So the only way for me to deal with it was to forget that my mother ever existed. So my sister and I, we just went on in boarding school. I totally blocked out my mom, totally blocked it out. And then I had children. My daughter was 9. My mother died when she was 36. So I had my own kids. We're sitting in church. I was not a believer in God, in Catholic religion at all, but we sat in church with my husband because he was a believer. And my daughter was 9. My other daughter was 7. And all of a sudden, they kept talking about, Mother's Day and mother. And all of a sudden, all the grief came out. And I didn't know what to do with it, so I walked out of church. And I found meditation, or meditation found me, the energy found me. And I think there was a reason for that. The thing is, I also had dreams when I was younger that it was a recurrent dream that we were all driving in the car, and my father was in the front, and all of a sudden my brother would disappear, then my other brother would disappear, my sister would disappear, my father would disappear, and I was the only one in the car, and here I am, I have no more clothes on, and the car is speeding to my death or whatever. I didn't know. I was out of control. It felt out of control. So I had this dream all the time, and I really was afraid to go to sleep. And I have written in journals. I have done now 6 years of meditation. I meditate every day. My grandson was born, and I said, wow, I don't have to grieve anymore, because the circle for me was, you know, here I was, I don't know, somehow the circle had closed and the pain was not there anymore, or not as strong. I could smile at it. But on the other hand, I am extremely afraid of losing my sister. I know my brother does not have, he's a smoker, he's a drinker, he drives drunk, and my other brothers is the same thing, and just being in their presence throws me out of whack again. So I was just wondering, it's a long story, but...
Yeah. Fear of losing your siblings.
Yes.
It's kind of natural.
Mm-hmm.
Two things I'd say. One is this afternoon you'll be learning Tonglen practice, or more about it if you already know about it. It's an interesting approach. You begin to reach out in your heart to all the people in the world who have lost their siblings, like the refugees and the people in the floods, and all over the world we see people suffering greatly. And you use your fear of losing your loved ones as a connection to the hearts of all the people in the world who have lost them. Do you see what I'm saying? And you understand what it is for them, like you stand in their shoes because of your own reoccurring dream, sort of, really, right? Even though now it's waking, it's similar to the car dream. And so you understand, also because of your mother's loss, but you understand what it's like for them, like really the groundlessness of it, the disorientation of it, how it feels in your body, how it feels in your head, you know, like what it feels like physically, that kind of loss.
I feel like I did not, people took away the privilege of having a bardo that was good for me from the time I was 9 until I was 36.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I was talking to a Tibetan teacher who was born in Tibet, came from Tibet, came to the West at the time of the Cultural Revolution. Mm-hmm. So that's in the 50s, I guess, right? Is it the 50s? And he just couldn't believe how we were in the West about dying, and how we didn't tell people that they were dying. We didn't talk to the family about the fact that death was happening, because he said in Tibetan culture it was so out front, and so everybody joined in and supported it, and it was everyone was awake to it. It was nothing hidden. And so your situation that you describe, I think it's less widespread right now, because there's been a lot of education on this subject. But still, there's people where it's still like that, where it's just you just don't go there. And the children are left in the dark, and nobody ever gives you the opportunity to grieve. But I would say just take all of that as wisdom. Wisdom about what it feels like to have those losses, and use it as the seed of love and compassion for other people, standing in their shoes, so that your relatedness. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Usually things like this make us go inward, and our world becomes smaller, so we can take the very same discomfort and have it be this. They traditionally say the seed of bodhicitta. And this will be the last question for today.
Thank you, Pema. I have an incredible amount of gratitude for you. My mother took her own life and about 10 years ago. And your book, When Things Fall Apart, was really my guide through the journey of healing. And it's been a guide for many things since then, other losses, other changes. And I had a question really about suicide in the Bardo, and what the teachings are about suicide in the consequences of life or mental illness, and also humane sort of chosen suicide when one is facing a fatal illness.
Right.
So there's sort of the two, and what the teachings are about those. Thank you.
Well, the basic view is that, for instance, with someone else's suicide, not the second part you were talking about, where you have a fatal illness, so with the doctor's support, you take your life. But that your state of mind when you die will determine your journey through the Bardo and your next birth. That's the view. So, of course, if you die in despair, feeling desperately depressed, lonely, all the things that would drive you to take your life. So when I know people that I'm close to who are having suicidal thoughts, I really talk to them about it's not an alternative, because you do it to get comfortable, to have the suffering end, but that's not what actually happens according to the view. The view is that state of mind goes with you. So it's not a pretty picture from that point of view, and it's very sad. And particularly if she committed suicide because of mental illness, but on the other hand, that's a kind of a painful view, if that's our loved ones. But on the other hand, you can do so much for your mother even now. Dedicate merit to her, give money to homeless people, help animals, help any way, any virtuous act. You can dedicate it. I do this for the welfare of my mother. I do this for the happiness of my mother. Wherever my mother is now, she has a different name and so forth, but because impermanence allows for anything to change and be possible, you wish that for her. And you actually do things kind of to support that view. So even if it's just for you, it's still for her because of your interconnectedness. And you have no idea where she is, and then whatever your belief system is about rebirth or not about rebirth, but nevertheless, it connects you with her from the heart, and you do it whatever you can to, with the aspiration that as she goes forward, that her mental illness goes, her despair goes, and she becomes more and more at home in her body and in the earth, you see? And that happens because of your aspirations and your prayers for her and so forth. And then in terms of assisted suicide, it is also, the view is, it's not like a heavy negative view, but the view is it's best to let the karma unfold and happen as it happens without interfering. And because there is always this little, this might sound, you might want to argue back and forth on this, but there's a little one opting for the comfort zone by taking your own life, you know. Whereas especially now when you can, with morphine, I've seen people in extreme pain not have pain and be able to die peaceful death. So you see, that's the view anyway. And as I say, I'm not like saying you all should hold this view, but that is the view. So you're welcome. So our time is up for this morning. We've covered the bardo of dying last night, the bardo of becoming of dharmata today, with the visions, and but knowing that they're your own projections. This gets into a very, really far out kind of discussion about, well, what about right now? Are we each other's own projections? But I'm not going there. But to know more about this, if you want to read the introduction of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or read the whole book, just out of curiosity, or read Punla Rinpoche's interpretation called Mind Beyond Death. Those books are in the bookstore, and they'll all kind of fill in for you more about all of this. So before ending with the ending chant, I wanted to say that on Saturday, which today is Saturday, at the noon teachings, I always say a little bit about the Pema Children Foundation. And I was given here a list of the things that now the foundation is supporting. And after this afternoon, this evening, and tomorrow, there's a table. There'll be a table in the coffee shop where you can go and find out more about the foundation and make donations if you wish to. But I just wanted to tell you, because I'm actually very pleased with what we're doing. Initially, the foundation started to develop an endowment for my home monastery, Gampo Abbey, in Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia. And then we just started to expand and started to support other things that I had a heart connection with. So the first thing was I wanted to start supporting Tibetan monastic women, Tibetan nuns, because they're in that culture, until more recently, the women were considered a lower birth. And so the fate of nuns was not so great. The monks had these huge monasteries and beautiful buildings and so forth, and the nuns were often lived in poverty. And so we started supporting different projects that were giving the nuns the same opportunity as the men, the same opportunities for meditation, the same opportunities for education, the same opportunities for practice. Now, in the Tibetan tradition, sometimes young girls and, say, also young boys go to the monasteries, and so they get their education through the monastery, and then they don't always remain monks or nuns as they grow older. But now, with supporting these, it's 7 different groups that are working for the benefit of the nuns. We support them and send money to them. And we're going to show a little movie afterwards which shows this 3-year retreat center that we built for the nuns in Nepal. And so we started doing that, and then simultaneously, the book initiative started. The book initiative is just a wonderful thing. We send books to any group that needs them and can't afford to buy them. So that's prisons and shelters and all kinds of groups that need the books, want the books, and we send them free of charge. So the money goes for that. And then the other thing is I wanted us to start giving money to what we've called at-risk communities. So for instance, the first was a group in Los Angeles called Homeboy Industries. And it's a group, their motto is jobs, not jail. And it's a group that finds employment for young men who were formerly, or women, who were formerly in gangs or have just come out of prison. difficult groups where they don't have much opportunity. And Homeboy Industries is just magnificent. It's in Los Angeles, primarily works with Latinos, gangs members and ex-inmates, but finds them jobs and changes lives dramatically. And then also a group doing very good work in Chicago, in Englewood, the part of Chicago that's very impoverished and has a lot of violence, and the Prison Mindfulness Institute and a few others. So, so those are the things that we're supporting now, and who knows what will happen next, but the at-risk community support, the Tibetan nuns support, and also we're starting to support Western monastics who are often on their own and need some help in order to continue with what they want to do. So that's what we're doing. I'm very proud of it. And if you want to know more or make a donation, you can go to the table. And thank you very much. And now we'll do the closing verses. And if nothing else after this weekend, maybe you'll remember these closing verses. When the appearances of this life dissolve, may I with ease and great happiness let go of all attachments to this life, like a son or daughter returning home. Yeah.
Right now, in Nepal, Tsoknyi Rinpoche's vision is becoming a reality. As campus construction nears completion, the nuns at Tsoknyi Gechuk Ling are receiving incredible teachings in both secular and Buddhist studies.
When I think about Rinpoche's vision at the very beginning in educating these little girls to what it's become now, it's amazing. One of the things that really struck me when I visited there is how much it has evolved into more of a true campus. I mean, it's got professional spaces, administration offices. It's going to have a library, a public dining hall. There'll be a lecture hall. The Shedra building has been finished. The primary school has been completely finished inside and out. It's got so much more potential now than just this sort of small single buildings that used to exist.
We started our school from zero, but now it turned out so well. These students are my responsible, so I want to raise them as the best quality which I can offer.
After 6 years of construction, the Tsoknyi campus has taken shape with an impressive array of buildings and facilities. The Tsoknyi nuns once crowded into a single, simple structure, but now they enjoy bright new classrooms, living spaces, and places to practice.
The initial group of nuns that began Shedra are now beginning their 6th year of study. They moved into the Shedra building in 2014, but they had been studying actually for a couple of years prior to that while the building was being constructed.
Inside, the nuns are studying, improving, and the quality also becoming more rich.
Pema Chodron thought it was important to sponsor this long-term retreat building because of the lack of opportunity that most female monastics have to experience long-term retreat. Her foundation sponsored the entire building of this Pema Chodron Drup Day. As soon as it was finished, a group immediately started a 6-month retreat.
When nuns finish their school and Shedra, they will go here to do practical practice for 3 years retreat, concentrating on meditation, and which they learn from higher realized beings, from India and from Tibet.
What really struck me was the impressive new Shrine Hall complex. The Shrine Hall will really be the place where Sokni Rinpoche's community of students will come together in Nepal.
This is the center of the nunnery. All the gathering of everybody every year we do here. So puja, the big teaching, and when everyone from the school, Tibetan community, Nepali, foreigner, all come here in this building. This building is a part of the main Shrine Hall, a special building for library. The first floor will be all the teaching hall, all the conference hall. We might invite some special guests, they can teach here. It holds about 400 people inside.
Along with the great strides in campus construction, the unique education of the Sokni nuns continues to develop and improve.
This kind of school is special because it has a great environment from the Buddhist influence and also good modern education, and they combine together. So all this together make them grounded and inspire, and also want to do good things.
The first group of students is in the 8th grade, the step before moving on to Shedra.
It's exciting to think about all the potential that these girls have. I've gotten to watch them over these last years grow up from rambunctious little girls to poised, beautiful young women. These same women will go through Shedra and retreat and service and become teachers themselves. That is what we all are so excited about.
Construction of the Sokni Gechakling campus is scheduled to be completed in 2019.
Dinosaur is big.
It looks so big.
Yes. Dinosaur has big legs.
I'm really happy. This year when I see whole thing, my expectation will fulfill, I think. So very happy.
It is so exciting to think that we're going to build, by the time it's all finished, 125,000 square feet in 6, perhaps 7 different buildings.
We sit here, discuss, see how we're going to change the world in a better way. Yeah. This is me.
Finishing construction is only the beginning, actually. Rinpoche thinks we'll have perhaps 300 nuns living at the nunnery.
From beginning and until now, not that much year, but I feel amazing. Especially this year, I have a big hope they can do great things in the world.
Join this worldwide effort to finish building the Sokni Gechakling Nunnery and Education Center, and continue making an incredible impact on the lives of these women and girls.